Welcome to today's episode of Health and Wealth. Today we're going to talk about venture capital, or VC as the popular term goes. With me to do that I have Johan Kördel, who is a managing partner and founder of Sound Bioventures. Welcome, Johan.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
My pleasure.
We'll see about that. Venture capital, that's a common term, at least if you're in our line of business, but what does it really mean? What does it mean to you?
To me, it means a source of not only capital, but also of knowledge and experience that aims at helping innovators bring their innovation a couple of steps forward. Depending on which discipline you're in, and I'm in life science, which is very long cycles and therefore rarely brings an idea all the way to the market, although that can happen. In tech, of course, it's usually what you do, you bring it to the market. But in life science, a venture investor takes a risk to test if an idea works. And when you know that it works, it's usually better taken care of by others. So for us, it's often into the pharmaceutical industry, right? Mm. So we back a company getting into clinical trials, doing clinical trials. And when you feel that, okay, this actually is a really good idea, it's going to help the patients, and it's going to make money for the investors, then as we saw in the pandemic, the large pharmaceutical companies, they're great at fast development, regulatory interactions. They're great at manufacture things and then commercializing it, right? So Pfizer partnering with BioNTech being the innovator that had the new technology, RNA vaccines, right? And Pfizer just put their machinery to their use, and we got vaccines on the market in a little bit more than a year.
So we're going to get into more of the details about the business and how you work and so on, but I'd like to take it back a little bit to the beginning, sort of. First of all, for those who are not familiar with Sound Bioventures as a fund, what kind of fund is it, and what's your role in the fund?
So Sound Bioventures is a Swedish venture fund that specializes in investing in clinical stage therapeutic companies. So it's a very niche indication within life science. And it's really, so Casper Bream and myself, who are two of the three founders, we work together. We're on our 15th year together investing. And we have learned a lot on the way. The third founding partner, Bibash Mukhopadhyay, who is an American that originates from India, he usually says that it takes $100 million to train a VC. I don't think we wasted $100 million, Casper and I, when we worked before we came to Sound Bioventures. But we, of course, learned a lot about what to invest in, and that's why we have such a niche indication. So we typically invest in Europe and in the US. 5 million euros, 7 million euros. It's usually the starting investment that we make because we don't have a huge fund. And then
how big is it?
The fund is 116 million euros, and it's a first-time fund. We made 6 investments, 1 in the US and 5 in Europe. We are in the process of making the 7th and maybe the 8th. So
interesting.
Keep an eye out for what that's going to be.
Well, so you actually you went into it yourself. My next question was that seeing as life science is a complicated field, and like you said, there are long life cycles involved in this, and the projects go on for a long time. Lots of capital needed, and generally considered as being a very risky area to invest in. So I was going to ask you, what makes you and your colleagues at Sound Bioventures better at it than the average investor?
So, of course, I am going to claim that what you said is true, but to be honest, we don't know yet, right? We know that from what we've done these years up until now, yes, we're quite successful, all three of us. But Sound Bioventures hasn't played out its first fund, right?
You haven't actually exited anything.
No, but as you were saying, it is complicated subject matter, and what is common between the three founders is that we've all worked in big pharma R&D, so we know how to make drugs. And then after that, we've worked for quite some time investing. So we've learned how we as a group are good at investing in drug development projects. So I think this is a key, that it is a complicated area, and the whole idea with venture is to take risks, but we're trying to limit the risks that we take, and we're also trying to not make them correlated in the portfolio. What do I mean with that? Well, we're probably not going to invest in several companies that have the same unproven technology. So, one at a time and see how it plays out. Now, for people who are just investing in life science, for us it's an advantage because we're working with a fund and we're investing into a portfolio. So we're trying to make sure that good things will come out. But if one or two companies fail, that's in the calculation. We hope that's not going to happen, but it can happen. And that's the advantage with working with a portfolio approach.
And we'll get into more detail also about the somewhat challenging odds of drug development. But so how and why did you end up in this field within investment? You mentioned that you had a big pharma background, but where did it all start from the beginning?
It started here in Lund.
Of course.
Well, I mean, it started back in Linköping. Those of you who know how I speak when I speak Swedish, you know that I come from that area. It's very obvious. So I came to Lund, and I studied chemistry. I went to the US and I learned how to use NMR spectroscopy to study the interaction between proteins and small molecules, drugs. And that led me into the pharmaceutical industry. So I started working at Pharmacia in Stockholm in the beginning of the 90s. And I had the good fortune to be one of the co-founders of the company Bioventures, where I ran research for a number of years. And then when it was time for Bioventures to go public, I decided that I needed to do something else. And I ended up being a venture investor. First with Lundbeckfonden in Copenhagen, where I met Casper. And then since, we've been working on the project for a while, but technically we've been investing for 2.5 years in Sound Bioventures. So, I really come from being a curious scientist, learning to lead people, and then learning to pick projects, manage projects, and then eventually how to invest in projects.
So when did you first realize that you actually had a knack for investing or for identifying interesting projects or assets when you see them?
It's been quite organic, this whole journey. It's not been that I set a goal or that I wanted to do something. Starting Sound Bioventures is maybe the first conscious goal that I set up, that I tried to achieve. Everything else has been a consequence of other people identifying my skills and then proposing to me that I should consider doing something, which I then eventually did. So I think the first time I realized that I'm really good at this is probably when one of my investments hit the market and overachieved over what I wanted. So I'll tell you about it because you warned me about some things you want to ask, and this is one of the things. So at Lundbeckfonden, I was part of investing together with the other two investors in a company called River Vision. Mm-hmm. This is a New York City-based American company. They had licensed the right to use an antibody that had been developed by Roche, and that antibody went against IGF-1 receptor. And the idea was to use it in oncology to try to stop signaling through that receptor and that would lead to apoptosis, and the cancer patients would, shrink their tumors or lose their tumors. They ended up actually going into 600 people. So 100 to do the phase 1 testing, 500 to do different types of phase 2 testing. And it turned out to be a very safe antibody, but it didn't have any efficacy that was noteworthy in these cancer patients.
That little detail.
Yeah. So, but it was still a good molecule. So if you could come up with another disease where inhibiting signaling through this receptor was important, Roche was willing to license it out to somebody to pursue that. And River Vision had gotten hold of this antibody, and their thesis was to go after thyroid eye disease, sometimes called Graves' orbitopathy. For those that are as old as I am, you might recall the UK comedian Marty Feldman.
Yeah.
And Marty Feldman had very protruding eyes, and he had actually had that disease. And then they had tried to correct it surgically, but somehow failed, because it is possible to correct the disease so that you can't see from the outside. So what it actually does, it builds up inflammation and scar tissue in the eyeball, behind the eyeball. So what you do is you plop out the eye and you scrape out the inside of the eye socket.
Sounds lovely.
And then you put it back. And that costs about $30,000. So it's, of course, a disease that can lead to blindness. But above all, it leads to social stigma, because people don't want to go out when they look like that. And it takes 3 to 4 years before the inflammatory aspect of the disease dies down.
Not everyone can use it to boost their humorous careers.
Indeed. There are rumors, I should mention, there are rumors about other famous actors that actually have that disease. So if you think about people that have protruding eyes, that might actually be what they suffer from.
Right.
But River Vision said, and I was one of the investors financing it, and River Vision set out to prove that it worked in this patient population. And they started a phase 2 trial, and they got breakthrough designation based on fantastic phase 2 results. So the phase 2 study was reclassified as a phase 3 study.
That's a dream scenario, isn't it?
It is a very strong scenario. It could have been even better if it had been in a different disease area, because in ophthalmology, the person running the division at FDA demands 2 trials. In some other rarer diseases, you can get away with just having 1 trial. So you can start out with a phase 2 program and actually end with the product that can be launched
on the market.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we were told that we needed to repeat that study, and because it was such strong efficacy, just as strong as historical comparisons to surgery, which we had placebos comparison. So basically you could then avoid having to do any surgery if you took this drug. You could do a smaller study. And so we had a choice, do that or sell the company. And we ended up selling the company to the company Horizon. Now, I can't talk about the information that relates to this, but somebody else has talked about it, so I can refer to what has been tweeted, and then you can think if it's accurate or not. So at the time when Horizon bought the company, they were valued at $2 billion, and they were sold in the beginning of 23, or bought by Amgen, right? And they were bought for $28 billion. The difference there mostly has to do with the promise of the drug that we sold to them. When we sold the drug, they said that peak sales would be $250 million. We said it will be $750 million. And because of this disagreement, you negotiate then something, right?
Middle ground.
So we got milestones and royalties to try to meet that difference. And in 2023, the drug sold for $2.2 billion. And before Horizon got bought, they had predicted that the peak sales will be about 3 billion. Now, what's been tweeted was that there was the financial investors invested money in the company and got 8 times that money back. And the amount invested was said to be 35 million. And there was 2 professional investors. So if all that is true, that will return a fund like Sound Bioventures in one investment.
If it was true, yeah.
What I'm most pleased about is the fact that there are all these thousands of patients that are being helped by this, and that it was possible to do within a relatively shorter time cycle because we got hold of a molecule that was already tested in man, and then because of the breakthrough therapy status, you only needed to do 2 different clinical studies, but they ended up being sequential. So if we had had more money and believed more in it, maybe we could have done 2 in parallel and cut a couple of years away from this going to the market. Now, this is one of the better investments that I've been part of, which of course is a good thing as well. Yeah. And we'll can come back
dive
to that.
We'll dive into the bad ones as well. Don't worry. No, but super interesting to hear. And I mean, you mentioned that from the beginning you were the curious scientist, and that, of course, in itself can make you good at identifying promising projects and so on. But somewhere around there must have been an interest for, well, money as well, or at least doing business, right?
Yeah. I mean, so both my parents were egna företagare, as we say in Swedish.
Entrepreneurs.
Yeah. So they had their own businesses, mostly in the service industry. So I grew up around thinking about things in terms of business. But I think it really is the venture game that not everything is suited for the type of skills that we have and the timelines that we have. So the reason why we only invest in clinical stage therapeutics is that maybe half of the risk in a project has been taken out of the project by the time it reaches the clinic.
Once you have proof of concept.
Well, we usually invest when it's because so much more money is needed when you start moving towards the clinical stages, right? So what we said is basically when you do GLP talks, which can be quite expensive, you usually need a lot of money, and that's usually where we come in. So about a year before you actually dose the first patient. So you've taken away a lot of uncertainty at that point, but it also means that the projects are more expensive because they've gained in value. But we don't mind taking that hit by reducing the probability of failure, I guess.
So that was a good story about your presumably one of the best investment you might ever do in your life. But do you want to share anything about what you consider to be one of your biggest mistakes?
So I actually think dwelling on your mistakes is it's not very good for anyone, and not for me. Casper and I, when we started out, we started keeping track of good investments that we didn't do. And that started to become quite depressing. So then we realized, okay, we need to keep track of bad investments that we didn't do. And then we realized there were so many that the whole thing just went away. So I would rather say that the kind of mistakes that I've been part of making professionally that I regret is usually waiting too long to take action. So, I mean, in a board of a very mature company, the only real job you have to do, I'm doing quotation marks, is to fire and hire the CEO, right? Now, of course, the smaller the company is, the more active the board is in helping the company, using, in our case, our networks, our experience, and so forth. But typically, when you start observing that the CEO is not the right CEO for maybe the phase the company's in, or maybe the CEO is going through, which has happened to me, going through something personally, Could be, a tragedy or a disease or something like that. And we typically wait too long because this is one of the hardest things we have to do as managers or as investors, to actually remove somebody from the job. It's kind of like, have you ever been in an earthquake?
Actually, I have. There was a very small one, I'm sure, with international measurements, but there was one with the epicenter near where I live, here outside Lund, when my son was less than a year old. Me and my wife woke up at 6 in the morning and the house was shaking, and we thought that a truck had driven into the house because we live quite close to the village road, if you will, and that was the only one time I.
And how did you react? First,
I was very surprised, and of course, all senses went into high alert. I went out to see what was going on, basically. So I guess it was a mixture of fear and I don't know, curiosity, or just being on the alert, basically.
So I did all my practical PhD studies in San Diego, which is not as bad as going up to San Francisco, but it's still part of earthquake country. So you get told exactly what to do, which is immediately get out of the bed or out of the sofa and go stand. If you can't get out, go and stand in a door opening with the door open, because at least then the walls are not going to fall on you. I lied in bed when a pretty strong earthquake happened, and I did nothing. I just waited to see if it's going to get stronger or weaker. And that was, of course, the completely wrong reaction. And I think boards and me on boards have a similar type of inertia. We should be acting much quicker. So in terms of regrets, there are a few cases where we should have acted half a year or a year earlier and didn't. And that got consequences that cost money.
Then again, like you said, delivering a tough message to someone, firing someone, that's also... I mean, it's if you have any empathy, that's a tough thing to do. And I know that you, in your fund, you have some guiding lights or motto. Would you like to share them?
Sure. This is one of the reasons why it ended up being Casper, Bibash, and myself, that we feel strongly about trying to be good in more ways than being financially successful. So our 4 value words are decent, which is the most important, that speaks to the behavior. Dedicated, that once we engage, we do engage. And we do that with confidence because we're competent.
Pretty darn good.
And the 4th word is to be humble. And I mean,
that was 3 though.
No, it was 4. So decent, dedicated, confident, humble.
Confident was 1.
So having been a big corporation person, you usually feel that this is all nonsense when they come dragging with processes for that. But it's a very different story when you set out creating your own company and you start talking about what is it that we want people to think about us as we act. And so it's something we try to give feedback that is helpful to companies that come to us that we don't engage with. And when we do invest, we work with the companies and we try to give them from our experience, our knowledge, and our networks above all, which are, something that a venture investor can bring apart from money.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I totally concur with your values. I think that in life, as in business, I mean, you have nothing to lose. Well, maybe in some instances you could lose something, but generally you have nothing to lose by being a decent person and treating people the way you would like to be treated yourself.
I agree with that.
Yeah. So, and personally, I'm very appreciative of the fact that you have been active part of some of Biostock's events, and I think you did that the first time, perhaps without knowing that much about what we do and what you were to expect. So, I think that's also speaks in your favor. There. So,
well, I mean, we're a Swedish fund. I happen to be stationed down here in the region, and I come from this ecosystem. I feel strongly about giving back to Swedish and Danish biotech in general, and personally a little extra about the Lund area.
So being decent and being a nice person, that's always good thing. Ultimately, when you develop new medicines or try to come up with new therapies or treatments, the goal is, of course, to in the end save lives or at least improve patients' lives. But as a fund manager, your job is also to make smart decisions, good deals, and create big returns to your investors. Is there ever a conflict there, you think?
So I don't think there is a conflict, but I have to qualify that, because let's take an example which I think could be a hot potato. Infectious diseases. We all know that as humanity, we need additional classes and better anti-infective drugs, be it antifungal or antibacterial, antiviral. But as things are now, no one is willing to pay for them. What the healthcare system wants to do is to have access to them, but then put them on the shelf, because you don't want to expose the population to drugs that they eventually could develop resistance against. I respect that. But the business of creating that drug then becomes not so lucrative. The public markets are aware of this, so publicly traded anti-infective companies are not valued as they should. There are attempts to look at some type of subscription model where you actually you have to pay for the drug disregarding if you use it or not. And that would probably then make it lucrative for investors to get into the area. So we would not invest in that area. And as a consequence, we will not lose money by saving lives. So we try to find the combination where we do good at the same time as being able to make money for our investors. So there's a lot of talk about impact. It's something I think that will become very obvious as we move forward. But right now, it is difficult to combine being a high returner and having high impact, because the diseases you would have the most impact in terms of number of lives saved is, of course, infectious diseases that no one touches. And then you have cardiovascular diseases, which you could probably have some impact, but it's also takes much longer, costs much more, it's difficult to work.
Not to get too deep into that discussion, almost philosophical or political discussion, but what would you think then, besides perhaps creating a new subscription price model, but who should take responsibility for creating the drugs needed? Because obviously they are very getting more and more acute, these problems with, for example, antifungal and resistance towards antibiotics and so on.
I think it becomes more of it would be unfair to place this on financially driven investors. I think it has to be placed on governments or larger organizations. In Denmark, the Novo Nordisk Foundation is sort of becoming a new third sort of entity because it's becoming so rich as a consequence of the good results from Novo Nordisk, the company, and especially now with their obesity drugs, which I'm sure we'll get back to. And they have a fund that they put up that actually invest in companies that develop these type of drugs. And I don't know what kind of requirements they put on that fund called the Repair Fund. But I assume it's not really financial. It's more measured in success in bringing these potential new drugs forward. And I think it's initiatives like that that will have to take care of drugs that are needed if the system is broken, which it is for infectious diseases.
Well, for some people, investment, they can also be a bit like gambling. You get real kicks from making a good deal or a good investment. I'd imagine, though, that approach fits badly with running a fund.
That would be unserious.
Unserious, yeah. So what gives you kicks then, as an investor or in life in general?
So, of course, I'm pleased if companies that we have backed and worked with are successful. But as we talked about before, in a portfolio thinking, you're also prepared that they could fail. Personally, I get kicks out of seeing the people that we have in our fund grow and being able of achieving more. I did get a kick out of being able to actually start, together with my two colleagues, this fund, because as many have told us afterwards, there are many failed attempts that are never published. And you have to have experience, you have to have track record, you have to have money in order to be able to start your own fund. And those things are very difficult to get, and then the timing in when you do it. Personally, I get kicks out of eating food that is made from things that I've been part of growing. So my wife and I have a big garden, and I think it's very fulfilling to actually be able to grow at least some of the vegetables and fruits and berries that I eat during the year.
Get vegetables that actually taste something.
And varieties that you can't buy in the supermarket, right? Because they were never made to be transported.
Oh, so you have green fingers, then, would you say?
Well, I'm not sure I have green fingers, but together with my wife, who's more of the gardener than I am, we do grow quite a lot of stuff during the summer half of the year.
Well, I guess you could draw a parallel between investing in companies that you hope will develop and also growing your own vegetables.
You could do that.
I could do that, yeah, for sure. But we talked about the portfolio thinking. I mean, roughly 90% of drug projects never end up making it to the market. And how do you handle that sort of poor odds then, besides just avoiding to put all your eggs in one basket?
Right. So we already talked about the fact that we invest a little later. So I don't know what the right number is, but maybe 50% of what people normally would invest in or develop at that stage fail. If we look back at the investments that Casper and I have done, so we did together with Mette, the third person, the manager of the group in Lundbeck Fund, and we did 35 investments. And now we've done 6 here. So we're starting to get some statistics. And the kind of things that we pick out, that we invest in, I think have a higher probability of being successful. It's a combination of really deep due diligence that we do. We not only do go through all the documentation that the company has and the plans, we also go out and talk to key opinion leaders in the area. We talk to pharma companies that might be interested in something like this a couple of years into the future to understand where they are and how they're moving. So we know a lot about the area. There are always going to be technical risks, right? And I told you about this situation where we already knew that the compound was safe. So in the cases when we invest before the phase 1 trials, then of course you have both safety and potentially efficacy to deal with, and then you want to have animal data that comes from an animal model of the disease that translates well into man, so that you feel some comfort that, okay, it's just the toxicity that we have to deal with. And then if you have an antibody, there are certain things you look for. If you have a small molecule, there are other things. So we're trying to understand what the risks we're underwriting, and it still has to be proven, but I would argue that our probability of success in a project is higher than the 50% that might be the average, right?
Yeah.
So it then becomes a question of being able to identify interesting enough assets so that you can deliver something like a 3x return, which is what investors in funds typically look for.
So it's not just a matter of identifying the project that could be viable in the medical sense, but it also has to be sellable.
Absolutely, and we are maybe a little particular in that we strongly prefer not to take the company public, so we prefer to sell it directly to pharma. And one of the reasons for that is that you end up being a 10, 20, 30% owner of an illiquid share. There's nothing wrong with going over the public markets. Sometimes they are perfect for what it is that the company needs to do in the next stage. And we have done it many times and then IPO'd and eventually traded out of the company. Yeah, you have to think about what the end stage is going to be for the investor, as well as what the end stage is for the actual product that you're developing.
Mm. And the pandemic, that brought a lot of attention to an investor interest to the biotech sector and to healthcare in general, and it also put quite a lot of focus on the innovative forces within drug development, specifically how fast things could move. Post-COVID, however, it's been kind of another story. I mean, it's been really rough for the sector, and capital's been expensive or is expensive, and a lot of companies struggle now to finance their projects and get funding, and investors shy away from the risky investments. So how has that affected Sound Bioventures and the way you work?
So first of all, a venture fund typically has a 4 or 5 year long investment period. And then ideally at that point, you then raise a new fund while you manage out the investments you did in the first fund. So we were lucky in that we managed to raise our fund just before the war on Ukraine and the subsequent recession financially and high interest rates. So we're still investing out of the first fund. So in terms of our timing, our issue will come when it's time to raise the second fund, if the markets have come back or not. I think it's counterintuitive to think about what to invest in, and I know we might come back to that. This is the time to invest in biotech, and now I think we're starting to see signs in the U.S. on the public markets that it is time. But everyone will always need drugs. So not even when people don't need weapons, they need drugs. So some industries you go in and out of because of what's needed. You can always invest in healthcare if you have a long-term vision, because drugs are always going to be needed.
Mm. So, yeah, and you mentioned it. I mean, when there's blood on the street, you should invest. That's a famous quote from a very wealthy investor. But so the investments that you have made this far with Sound Bioventures, were they during this period where there was blood on the streets?
I don't like that phrase.
It's a horrible expression, really.
But I agree with you. So the valuations, as they came down in the public markets, they also came down on the private side, and the valuations are favorable. So this, as a venture investor, this is a good time to be investing. Now, if we are specific about this, there's been quite a lot of M&As that have been announced November up until now. There's been a number of IPOs done on NASDAQ, which actually have traded up, which is not, the real test. The test is not to be able to go public, because if you have 100% of the IPO being guaranteed by the sitting investors, it's just a technical procedure, right? So the trick is that other people want to buy the stock and it trades up. So I think that's giving us the sign that in the US, in the public markets, they're coming back.
Will that trickle over to the Nordics?
Of course it will, but the question is when, right? And you and I have joked on stage about the fact that if I knew when, I wouldn't tell you. I would go and make bets on the market, right? Now, our fund can only invest in private companies, so it's only indirectly relevant to us. And it is, of course, very relevant what happens on the public markets, because if they come back here, then it's a possible way for us to have an exit. Although I said we don't prefer it, it's definitely one of the tools we'll use to finance companies. So I think this is going to be tough this year here in the Nordics. I think more companies will go bankrupt because of the very low valuations and lack of interest in putting more money into the companies. I think at the other end, it will have been good for our ecosystem, but it's going to be very difficult during that period of time. And on a personal level, and of course, there are going to be tragedies, right? So it is difficult, but I do see that there will be light. Question is when. Maybe in the beginning of next year.
How long is the tunnel?
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah. So, but you're still liquid in your fund. You have dry powder, so to speak, to invest in. But what were you looking for in terms of bad signs or red flags that would definitely make you back away from a deal, even if it looks interesting starting out?
So as a banker told me a number of years ago, this is a people's business. And that comes back to our value words and our philosophy that there has to be trust. So the prime reason for us to walk away from a deal is if we in due diligence discover something that we were not told up front, or if we in the process of dealing with a company start to feel that we're not being told the truth or that management is not bankable. That's really the main reason to walk away from a deal. I think that the second also relates to people, and that has to do with governance issues. So if there is different types of share classes and the voting system is complicated, or if there is a too dominant investor, or if somebody has a veto, those are situations we don't want to be part of. We like to syndicate, we like to invest together with other investors, and we don't want to be in a position where we are the only ones deciding. We want to be a collective that do it together, because we assume, and usually correctly, that other investors bring more than money, right? That they also bring their experiences and networks and their wish to work with the company and help the company. Then I think the third thing is sometimes there are devils in the details when it comes to contractual obligations that the company might have made, or that in the actual fine print of the investments that you're doing, that there's something you can't get to a position where you're comfortable.
How about IP, intellectual property details? Could that also be?
That could be an issue, and it could definitely be an issue. There are usually so long cycles here that so much can happen, but if you start out with identifying problems that you are afraid can't be worked around, then that could definitely be a situation. And I've been involved in negotiations recently where an American investor walked away from a potential deal with a Scandinavian company based on their view of IP, and we didn't have the same conclusion, but these are important things. We, as an investor, if we are confident that there's going to be orphan drug designation, and then if the kind of extensions you can have, we feel that there's enough protection to be able to work with that. But if you have to believe that if you have to go through selling a company, then you have to look at what the buyers want. And there are still a lot of buyers that want to have composition of matter patents and that aren't happy with just the other onions in the layers, as the IP lawyers usually
formulations, say. Data protection, so on.
Right. So it's something we as all investors look at, but there are, with our experience, we see that usually there are ways to create additional protections as you go along, but there has to be some fundament, and you have to have freedom to operate. Otherwise, you can't work.
So you mentioned negotiating with an American investor. What are you like as a negotiator? Are you the
personally?
Yeah, are you the good cop or the bad cop?
So if I can only choose those two roles, I'm probably the good cop. But I usually just put the issue on the table and try to create a win-win. Casper, being Danish, he's a much better negotiator than I am. And for the things where it's important, I usually delegate negotiating to him.
You push him forward.
No, I don't need to push him.
Ah, okay. He takes that role gladly. That's cool. In the balance between making good deals, thinking ahead to, you need to, how can I tweak this negotiation or this deal to my benefit? There's a balance there between winning the negotiations, so to speak, and also keeping the other party happy. I mean, investing in companies with entrepreneurs and founders, there needs to be motivation on the other side of the table, even after the deal is done. How do you manage that balance?
I agree completely with that. So, so I think it's important to care about something, but not care so much that you can't walk away from it. And you brought up the entrepreneurs. They have to be rewarded, and they have to see that whatever is happening is also to the benefit of them, right? I mean, but fundamentally, we wouldn't invest in something where we didn't see that it actually will help patients. And if it helps patients, then somebody will want to buy it. And then it will be worthwhile to have made the investment, right? So we typically work with warrants or options or some type of financial incentive for the people that are important for the company. So even if we come in and dilute people, we then usually add other financial instruments to make it interesting for the entrepreneurs to keep working with the company.
I've seen quite a few memes, as you call them, about VCs or venture capitalists. I quite often see them on LinkedIn, I think. And the joke is usually about all VCs being, well, first of all, perhaps slightly evil, that they want to take as much as they can for as little money as possible. Then again, also that it's kind of like a flock of sheep, that everyone runs to the same direction, to the next hot thing. Would you agree that that's is there any truth in that?
So in my career, having been part of co-investing with maybe 100 funds, directly or indirectly through my partners, there are people who are maybe not evil, but for lack of a better word, assholes. And I don't want to deal with them, and no entrepreneur should have to deal with them. But unfortunately, money corrupts, and there are people who shouldn't be in this industry. So we don't have a physical list, but we have a list in our heads of people that we're not going to work with because they are not fair. They're not decent. But I think there are many who actually can balance the fact that you're trying to do something good for humanity and make money and ensure that the entrepreneurs would be interested in doing it again and thinking about doing it together with you. So trying to balance those things out. And it comes back to if you're a decent person, then those things will work out.
Money corrupts, you said. Do you invest your own money in life science, for example?
So if you want to raise your own venture fund, you have to invest your own money. That is one of our LPs said to me, and I hate the phrase, you have to have your hand on the hot plate too. So personally, I don't invest on the side. And I think every VC fund has some ethical rules about how you can do that if you want to do it on the side. So you can't do it making it compete with your own portfolio you can't do it in the companies that you're otherwise investing in unless it's done sort of through the fund, right? But of course, if you spend, as I've done, 33 years in the area, then you have a lot of knowledge. And for those that are interested in doing their own public investments, why not use that knowledge? But that's not for me.
Mm. And I imagine also that you come in contact with quite a few entrepreneurs, hopeful, full of spirit, full of, guys that think they have the next great idea, and it might not be in the phase or in the size or otherwise not fitting the criteria for your fund to invest in. Wouldn't it be tempting then to help them yourself, more like a business angel?
I think that's for my next phase of my career. It definitely takes what I have to give, both in terms of money and energy, to be one of the managing partners of Sound Bioventures. Mm. But no, I agree with you, and we see many of our colleagues, right, as they approach the end of their careers, they become quite active as board members and business angels, and I like that. I think it's good.
Mm. And speaking of looking ahead and in time, if we look 5 years from now, do you think where will Sound Bioventures be then? Will you be having exited some of your investments or all of the current investments, and will you be a winner, you think?
I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think that we would be a winner. I don't like the word winner because that means that somebody has lost. So hopefully, we're successful. Let's put it that way.
In Swedish schools, everyone wins. Or in kindergarten.
No, I don't believe in that either. But there should be no losers. Mm. Figure that out. So 5 years from now, we will definitely have exited companies. And some of those will have been successful, and hopefully not that many will have been failures. I think I will be engaged in preparing to raise fund number 3 5 years from now.
Yeah. And just out of curiosity, I'm not sure you can share it with me, but you spoke earlier about syndicating, teaming up with other investors, and also then when you raised your fund, obviously you don't go around to private persons asking for money, I think, or at least I think so. So who is it that you work with in these cases? Do you go globally when you look for investors, or how do you think?
Yeah, we do. So some of this is public information, so it's not a strange question, but it is the one thing that the funds never talk about between each other, right? Because this is the secret sauce. How are you able to actually get investors into your own fund? So we like to invest together, but we never talk about where our money comes from. Mm. So we've been fortunate in that some government institutions that have this role to invest in private equity and venture capital funds. So Some Invest in Sweden is one such organization. Vækstfonden in Denmark, they are now part of a larger organization that does more things called AFO, the European Investment Fund in Luxembourg, that uses EU money. So those are examples of institutions that do this for a living, trying then to, advance innovation in the different geographical areas that they operate in. Then we have the Nova Holdings organization that have invested in us and a number of other venture funds in the Scandinavian region, because their strategy here is to support other groups to grow stronger, so that there will be more innovation backed in the region and more professional investors that they can co-invest with. And then it's family offices. The traditional investors in venture funds are pension funds, insurance companies, banks, but they go for more mature players. So they want to see statistics with the same team in the same constellation. That usually means that you have to be on your third or fourth fund before they can have that information. And at that point, they might engage. So while other investors that can take more conviction-based decisions, they are willing to go with so-called emerging managers. So yes, we try to do this on a both European and American base. And when it's time for fund number 2, we'll see if we can broaden the group that are interested.
I'm just curious, what was the most challenging thing when you were raising fund number 1, being then emerging, as you call it?
I think at the end of the day, it is that they still ask for a track record. And you're a first-time fund, so you don't have a track record. But as individuals, we have track records. And there are more stories than the one I told you that Casper and that Vibash can tell. And that helps to form the picture of if we historically have been successful in being investors. But I think that is the trick, and it's not different from being a CEO or a CFO for a biotech company having to raise funds from people like me, right? You have to meet a lot of people, and then eventually you get some traction, and if you get some traction, maybe you can use that to get some other people too. Because coming back to something you said that I didn't really respond to, I mean, investors tend to be flock animals, and tend to, if somebody else is doing something, you don't want to miss out on a good deal, right? But if no one else has taken the conviction step, then you might be reluctant to do that. We try not to be too impressed by what others decide.
Struck by FOMO.
Struck by FOMO, but I think it's difficult not to have that as at least some factor in what you do. It was not easy, and we did this during the pandemic, so a lot of it had to be done virtually. And I know that I ended up going to people's summer homes, sitting outdoors, and actually having a physical meeting. Or once the restrictions were lifted, we went to see people that had backed us, so that we actually got to see each other live.
For how long did you have to sort of prepare and do these introductory talks and convincing? How long before you could actually start the fund or start investing?
Yeah, so we kept at it for 2 years, and it could probably have been done in 12 to 18 months if we hadn't had the pandemic, because that slowed down a lot of processes. But it is, we were fortunate, and we do have something that we can talk about. Not everything we've done we can talk about, but we can talk about some things that we've done, so that we have a track record that can make people comfortable. And as in most jobs, you have to have references that are willing to talk about you and how you are as an investor. And they got calls from a lot of people asking about us.
Then it definitely helps if you have been a decent person in your earlier life. Then
I think you have to treat everyone in the right way, because you never know what's going to happen in the future,
and who they know.
I think even more importantly.
So you mentioned institutional investors then as big part of your investor network. As a private person, is there any way to invest in, for example, Sound Ventures, or is it a closed shop, so to speak?
Well, the Sound Bioventures Fund 1 is closed. Yeah. And I think to invest in a venture fund that invests in life science, I think it's possible as a private individual, but most funds will put a lower cutoff for how small investments they accept. And if the name brings something more than just money, if it is an individual you can point at saying, well, this person is actually invested in us, then you might lower that limit to be able to say that if they have name recognition in some circles when you're fundraising. But it's usually, I think it's going to be quite big tickets to be able to do that.
You need to be rich enough to have your own family office, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been great talking to you, and I think that our time is kind of running out. But I would be committing a huge error if I didn't ask you what you in Sound or you personally are looking at right now in terms of, well, the next hot thing. I mean, AI is on everyone's lips, obesity is on everyone's lips, and there are probably other things. But what are you focusing your attention to right now?
So having an American in the group is very good. It also means that there are many sports metaphors, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with the quote that Wayne Gretzky, the greatest hockey player of all time, is quoted with, which is, "I don't skate to where the puck is, I skate to where the puck will be." So in terms of investing, for any investment, you shouldn't invest in what people are talking about now. You should invest in what people will be talking about in the future. Now, having said that, I think AI will be here in the future, and obesity will be here in the future. So the question is to figure out, where are they on the, in the innovation hype cycle, right? And I think they're both on their way up towards the peak before they hit the valley of death. When we look for things, where, for instance, if you take antibody drug conjugates, which is hot now, but it was not hot over the last 7-8 years. So they're probably at that trough on their way up to some more stable level of innovation. So I think one has to think about that. So AI, since we only invest in therapeutics and we are unlikely to invest in AI, will every company we invest in have AI as a way of doing what they're doing? Absolutely. They already do. I mean, I use the AI chat GPT or Gemini engines regularly to test thoughts and concepts. In drug discovery, absolutely, it will be used.
Would love to see one of your prompt library. It would be fun to take a look at.
Yeah, that probably is going to tell you a little bit of what kind of things we're looking for, right? Mm-hmm. So, obesity, we have historically said that in the area of diseases where if you run a phase 2 trial and you get efficacy, but it isn't good enough for pharma to engage, you still believe in what you're doing, you have to take the next step. It will, in some diseases, be too costly to be able to do that. And obesity, overt obesity, will be one of those, where you probably have to do 5,000 patients, 2 years, cardiovascular outcome. Can't do that on venture money. So historically, I would have said that obesity is not for us. GLP-1 or GIP or whatever versions of that is not for us because that's already done. And the drugs that are on the market now have dramatic efficacy, and they turn out also to be good for our kidneys today, so on, for our hearts and so forth. But anyone who follows the field knows that if you cycle on and off the drug, you mostly lose on the integrins, as they're called. You mostly lose fat, but you lose muscle. And then if you go off the drug, you regain fat. And so if you cycle because you have to copay or pay yourself and don't have enough money to keep paying for it, you could end up just losing not all your muscle, but a lot of your muscle and still be as fat, right? So, of course, the companies are looking for ways of losing fat without losing muscle, rather than being appetite suppressants, which the integrants are. If you can increase energy expenditure without hitting the heart, if you could be more selective in your satiety so that some foodstuffs are not being consumed while others are. So it's becoming very, I hate the word precision medicine, but, more exact as to what they're doing, right?
Why do you hate that word?
Because as long as you have a molecular target, it's precision. But people are sort of using it at a macroscopic level, right? Yeah. So if you go from chemotherapy, which basically kills all your cells in your body, but kills the cells that grow the fastest, right? That's the theory. So, yes, it's a very blunt way of treating cancers, but up until now, that's what we've had. And in the future, we will have precision medicine. So, but as a scientist, I don't like the word because going beyond chemotherapy, everything is precision. So I think, it's important to look at where will the field be rather than just jump in. And I think there's also a moral responsibility for us that are in this industry, because I don't know how many statins there are in the market. There are like 7. And you probably need somewhere between 3 and 7 because patients have negative reactions against one particular statin. Then you need to try them on another. But you don't need as many as the PD-1s and PL-1s that we are having on the way to the market now. And it's just wasteful doing these thousands of clinical trials in different combinations in different types of cancers. That money should go into other things, right? So stop doing integrin trials. Start figuring out where the next wave for obesity is going to be. So for us, I think it's more a question of trying to identify medical problems that are not just an incremental improvement. So while it could be very worthwhile for the patients to take 1 tablet instead of 2 tablets per day, that's not where we invest. We invest where there are patients that are not being treated today or are being treated inadequately, so that it's immediately obvious to anyone, the doctor, the healthcare system, the patient, that if we did this for you, it would be better for you. And if that's the case, then somebody will then understand the value of the innovation and will take it off your hands. And the reason why we're not in medtech or diagnostics or in services is that you often have to take that innovation all the way to the market and grow the volume of the sales before the people that might release a financial investor understands the value. And unfortunately, that takes too long for the kind of money that venture funds borrow, essentially, from our investors. Nothing wrong with being in that industry for mankind or, for society or for yourself. Worthwhile businesses, but they're not compatible with venture.
Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, or rather at the beginning of the day, what's your strongest driving force? What compels you to get up out of bed in the morning and go to work? What's the most important part?
Curiosity. Curiosity about people, curiosity about science. And what I think is so fantastic with this field now is that we are getting older. And as a consequence, because evolutionarily we were not made to be as old as we are, so more diseases emerge. Medical needs increase. Innovation is just accelerating, right? And just look at what AI is going to do to this field over the next 5-10 years. So that means that we're trying to meet those needs faster and faster. I already talked about the fact that we favor to go over pharma on the way to the patients. So pharma they're going to lose about a quarter of their revenue over the next couple of years because of patent cliffs and, generic coming in, which is good for society, competing out those innovations, being moneymakers for the pharmas. So they have to replenish that. And they have, I don't know what the name is, but a T of dollars. So, trillion
dollars
in Swedish. I don't know what it is.
Lots of cash, basically.
They have so much cash so that they can buy that innovation, right? So we help society and mankind and patients. And on the way, we make money for our investors. It's wonderful.
That's wonderful.
Try it.
Definitely. I think that's a perfect note to end on. So I'd like to say thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. It was very educational and interesting, and also nice to get to know you a little better.
Thanks for having me.